If you've been around long enough, you might still remember the old ages where the One Piece anime was still called One Filler Piece, when your favorite shows never got sequels even though it was incredibly popular, and when anime movies weren't this common. What happened? What caused all these changes in the industry? I'm sure you read the title and thumbnail, so I won't beat around the bush. It's Demon Slayer. Its never before box office convinced the industry to prioritize animation, expand internationally, and apparently squeezing a movie for as much as they can. Of course, we can't talk about how Demon Slayer changed the industry without first talking about its achievements. After all, if the franchise wasn't insanely successful, it wouldn't have led to all the changes current day. I think most of you are familiar with the box office records, the frequent headlines back in 2020 when the Demon Slayer Mugen Train movie broke multiple records, but I think few are actually aware of just how successful this movie was in Japan. In 2020, the pandemic was still roaming in Japan and many industries suffered because of it. In particular, the movies industry was in shambles as a huge portion of its revenue depended on physical theaters. Sony, the Japanese conglomerate best known for PlayStation 5 and K-pop Demon Hunters, reported in their 2020 financial report that a 129 billion loss in sales had occurred within their movies department. Similarly, Toho, the Japanese entertainment company behind Godzilla, also shared in their 2020 report that it suffered a staggering 31.5% loss in sales and only earned 137 billion. It is then quite mind-blowing to see that Demon Slayer Mugen Train's success alone had actually greatly transformed those otherwise quite gloomy financial reports into slightly positive ones. Sony revealed later in that 2020 report that they had actually had an 11% increase in sales within their music department and specifically credited Demon Slayer's Mugen Train as the reason. Since Lisa, the singer who sang for the movie, was signed under Sony, the song's global virality had turned into a massive revenue stream for the parent company. While their film division struggled, their music and anime divisions via Aniplex were thriving. The impact on Toho was even more concentrated. While the company earned 137 billion for their fiscal year, a massive 20% of that total came from Demon Slayer alone. In fact, Toho's 2020 report only tracked figures from March to November. Since Mugen Train wasn't released until mid-October, that meant it managed to contribute over 30 billion in just 6 weeks, effectively doubling their revenue compared to the previous quarter. The movie's success didn't exist in a vacuum. It vibrated and echoed to all aspects of Japanese society, evolving from a popular anime movie into a national economic icon. The Japanese media even coined a term for it called the Demon Slayer phenomenon. Demon Slayer's popularity wasn't just about more people watching a shonen anime. It was a macroeconomic event that some researchers believe to be worth more than 270 billion, approximately 2.7 billion USD at the time. A large part of that 270 billion was in character business, a term specifically for the transactions surrounding the massive web of licensing and merchandising of an IP's characters. Demon Slayer was on everything, from ramen to towels to stationery to curry. As long as you lived in Japan in 2020, you had no chance of escaping them. The reach of Demon Slayer was so insane, families in Japan were actually experiencing a social trend called Demon Slayer poverty. Since Demon Slayer was practically on everything, parents often lamented at their empty wallets as their children begged for more Demon Slayer merchandise. Due to the popularity of the movie, the manga sales also skyrocketed. While Demon Slayer had already caused a stir in 2019 by ranking first with 12 million copies, its true power was unleashed in 2020. That year, it sold a staggering 82.3 million copies, shattering records to become the fastest manga in history to reach a 100 million milestone. If you aren't aware of how impressive that number is, the second place that year, Kingdom, sold around 8 million copies. The demand was so feverish, people were genuinely willing to pay full price for secondhand copies. The most incredible thing is that Demon Slayer not only boosted its own sales, it resuscitated the entire physical manga industry. For years, Japan's print manga market had been in a slow, painful decline as people leaned more and more towards electronic versions. The manga market in 2020 was around 600 billion, an insane figure that had never been reached since 1995 when Dragon Ball was at its peak. Yusuke Murata, the illustrator for the manga One Punch Man, went to Twitter and expressed his gratitude to Demon Slayer for its contributions to the massive new wave of readers. But manga sales records weren't the only thing that Demon Slayer managed to break. In fact, Demon Slayer's success quite literally transformed the world of anime forever. One of the most important aspects it changed was the fact that it surpassed the stereotypes of highly grossing animation films. In the past, many believed that the only type of animation films that got a high box office were movies that had a famous director. Examples included Hayao Miyazaki and Makoto Shinkai. However, Demon Slayer's success proved that anime movies can make bank just by being part of an extremely popular series. Movies like Jujutsu Kaisen 0, One Piece Film Red, The First Slam Dunk, and Haikyuu The Dumpster Battle are all examples of extremely successful animation films with a box office of over 100 million. In fact, if we look at the timeline, animator who worked on Jujutsu Kaisen 0 mentioned that the film was completed in just 4 months. Given that the film was released on December 24th, 2021, it's highly likely that management whipped the production team to cash in on the Mugen Train hype while the iron was still hot. In the past, although animation films of popular anime such as Naruto and One Piece existed, there were often side stories that weren't directly affiliated with the source material. With the success of these direct adaptations, such as Jujutsu Kaisen 0, management realized that they found a safe yet lucrative venture. Adapting crucial manga arcs meant you didn't have to risk writing something that offended fans. Furthermore, adaptations of extremely popular arcs like the RZA arc from Chainsaw Man can ignite the pipeline for later manga and merchandise sales. Such ventures have become so widely successful, in 2026, Aniplex and Kadokawa established Animech, a company dedicated solely to the theatrical distribution and promotion of anime films. Of course, for most average viewers who are more into watching seasonal anime, perhaps the biggest change in industry is the why and how of making anime. Arguably, the most important change to the anime industry is the shift in the goal of creating anime. Before Demon Slayer's success, anime was seen primarily just as an expensive commercial to sell the source material. Anime itself actually didn't quite make that much money. Its inherent risk is why the production committee model was even created. But, you guessed it, Demon Slayer's success changed that. For the first time in forever, the higher-ups and management finally realized that a well-animated show can be immensely profitable even if it involved a slightly dark topic like murder. Now, it might seem obvious to us viewers that good quality animation means higher ROI, better fight scenes means higher chance to attract viewers who might later take out their wallets. But you have to realize the people making the important decisions are often 50, 60-year-old executives who genuinely need bar graphs and PowerPie to understand. With this realization came an entire new ecosystem of anime. It's what I like to call an IP-centric marketing machine. The premise is simple. Step 1, pick a popular source material, whether it be a manga or light novel. Usually it's something that's already selling like hotcakes. Step 2, find a talented animation studio to cover the animation and ensure that the quality is superb. This is a very crucial change as the anime aspect wasn't always valued this much in the past. One example is Attack on Titan, an incredibly well-loved and popular manga. Its first season aired in 2013, but its second season never aired until 2017. Even if you consider the predicament of being scared to catch up to the source material, 4 years is still way too long for a second season. This really showed that the production committee or higher-ups responsible for managing Attack on Titan didn't really consider the anime to be very important, as they actually had a live-action movie which was released in 2015. Clearly, they thought that this would be the better decision to build the franchise. At least Attack on Titan's later story did get animated and got a well-deserved adaptation. Other series aren't as lucky. The Promised Neverland second season is perhaps the most example of this. Despite also being an incredibly popular manga, its second season was butchered, rushed, disastrous, disappointing, and a complete failure. I don't want to speculate, but since the production team was basically the same for both seasons 1 and 2, I think it's highly likely that the production committee were the ones that forced Cloverworks to complete the entire story of The Promised Neverland within 1 season, since the manga was ending and there's no point putting more effort into the anime. It's quite tragic, especially considering nowadays where production companies are literally dragging out a popular anime as much as they can. But perhaps the best case study of the shift to focus on better animation is One Piece. As a longevity icon that's been here way before and probably way after the Demon Slayer change, the changes within the series I think best reflect the industry's pivot. I mentioned the movie earlier, but the anime TV series has also gone through some big changes. If you have been paying attention, you would know that the One Piece anime looks a lot better since 2020. In fact, starting in 2026, Toei, the company responsible for the One Piece anime, is finally abandoning the quantity over quality approach and is now airing new One Piece episodes as a 2-core series annually. Combined with the announcement of the One Piece remake, it's very apparent that Toei is going with the trend and focusing on creating more high-quality adaptations of the series. Of course, now that we have the anime in our hands, the next step is marketing and making the anime known. Physically, posters and trailers would be posted everywhere, from convenience stores to malls to subways. You'll probably find yourself sitting through 2 unskippable ads of the hottest new anime if you're in Japan. Musically speaking, anime adaptations are increasingly conducting tie-ups, essentially pairing highly anticipated anime with singers and having both parties mutually benefit from the popularity gained after the anime air. I think the best example of this is Idol by YOASOBI. When paired with the explosive first episode Oshinoko, Idol blew up and was in the first place in the charts for months. Other examples also include the 13 singers who sang for Chainsaw Man Season 1 and having CreepyNuts, the group behind this song, sing for Dan Dan Dan. Furthermore, the production companies have also invented a new strategy of using compilation films as a form of advertisement. If you didn't know, compilation films are literally combined anime episodes that get released as films. Objectively speaking, they're not very high effort, but to the shock of many, they actually make quite a bit of money. Demon Slayer, for example, will always release a compilation film before its new seasons. The film itself is literally just the last 2 episodes of the previous season and 1 new episode from the unreleased new season. Yet, it makes a lot of cash for its investment. The movie Demon Slayer to the Swordsmith Village was just a compilation of the last 2 episodes of the 2nd season and the first episode to the Swordsmith arc, yet it had a box office of over 56 million. Putting the anime episodes in theaters is not only a direct avenue of profit, it's also a great form of advertisement. Oshinoko aired its first 90-minute episode in local theaters before the anime even came out. Dan 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 also chose to air its first 3 episodes as a worldwide theatrical release before its official television release. Furthermore, compilation films also pair greatly with the new airing structures of modern anime. You might have noticed that many new anime nowadays are releasing multiple episodes in the first week, or just releasing extra long first episodes. Furiden released 4 episodes in its first week, The Apothecary Diaries released 3 episodes, and Oshinoko literally had a 90-minute first episode. This new structure not only pairs extremely well with theaters, it's also a better way to sell the story as people will have more content to discuss when the anime first comes out. On top of theatrical releases, music tie-ups, and physical advertisement, the television networks in Japan are also stepping up their game and joining the anime trend. For a very long time in Japan, cable and television networks were the norm. In fact, even now with the impact of streaming sites, television networks still have an important presence in the entertainment industry. This applied for all things, including anime. When anime is ready to air, production committees will often buy time slots from networks. Unfortunately, 99% of the time, those slots were graveyard slots. Graveyard slots are essentially time periods when networks believe to be less than average viewers, and it's often the only slots reserved for anime because television networks always viewed anime as niche shows that less people watched. The only shows that got prime slots, time slots with higher than average viewership, were extremely popular and family-friendly shows like One Piece. All other anime just got piled into the graveyard slots. However, things have changed. With the rise of streaming platforms, television networks are finding it harder and harder to adapt into the modern landscape. Combined with the popularity of social media platforms like TikTok, these networks are finding it harder and harder to keep their viewers. They need to find a new way out, and conveniently, Demon Slayer's success pointed them in the right direction. To give you some numbers for clarity, when Demon Slayer Mugen Train first aired on TV, it received a household rating of 21.4%. Honestly quite unheard of since most anime rarely even crack 2%.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Fuji TV was the fastest as it quickly signed a contract and aired Demon Slayer's later seasons on its prime 11:15 time slot. Demon Slayer performed extremely well and actually had a 9.2% rating with its first episode of season 2. Other television networks obviously couldn't let such a good gold mine slide. Of course, since the Demon Slayer was already taken, they chose to reach out to other popular shows. One example is Spy Family. If you're an elitist just like me, you're likely familiar with the popularity of Spy Family before it even got an animation. As one of the few manga that appeared on the annual top 10 manga sales list before getting an anime, you know for sure TV networks were going to try their best to cash in on that. The first season of Spy Family aired at 11 p.m. on Saturdays. It wasn't a prime slot per se, but it was very close. The first episode of Spy Family received a household rating of 3.1%. Now that might not seem like a lot compared to Demon Slayer, but you have to realize Spy Family accomplished this while being available on multiple streaming platforms. Furthermore, TV Tokyo, the television network that snatched Spy Family, is definitely not the most popular network, and thus the numbers that Spy Family popped were certainly exciting for the higher-ups. Another example is Frieren. I'm sure most of you are aware that Frieren aired its first 4 episodes at once, but some of you might not know that Frieren actually aired on Nippon TV's Friday Roadshow, a premium 2-hour time slot usually reserved for Ghibli films. On top of that, Nippon TV also later made the decision to create a new time slot called Friday's Anime Night, and it's exclusively used to air just anime. That time slot was later used to air many popular shows like The Apothecary Diaries. With all this set up, now the production companies are ready for the ultimate step: profit. There are many revenues for this: manga sales, contracts with the streaming sites, etc. But I think the most important and lucrative component of this money-making process is the character business, or to be more specific, selling merchandise and signing licensing contracts. According to the Yano Research Institute, research estimates that the character business market in Japan will grow to 2.83 trillion in 2025. Of course, it's certainly not all anime, as IPs like Sanrio and Chikawa are also included. But the Institute does report that anime characters take a huge chunk of this number. In particular, production companies like to use media mix strategy, utilizing different media forms like manga, anime, games, and novels to increase character recognition. The Association of Japanese Anime also reported that in 2024, the merchandise market grew to 748 million, an increase of 106.8% from last year. I think more than ever, production companies have realized and seized the opportunity to turn anime into something akin to Pokemon or Sanrio, using the anime as a form of marketing to sell the characters and heavily profit off the merchandise like figurines, badges, and posters. Of course, if you're an anime lover and love collecting these, then you're just in luck. Not only are more and more companies coming out with more, they're also making it easier than ever to purchase them as a Westerner who doesn't live in Japan. Why? Because the anime market is growing more than ever due to it steadily expanding to the international market. According to the Association of Japanese Anime's 2025 report, the international market for anime has been rapidly increasing over the past few years, even becoming bigger than Japanese markets. In the past, due to the rise of streaming platforms, anime production committees were already having conversations with Netflix or Amazon Prime to sign streaming deals. Since anime is honestly quite cheap to make, the deals with streaming platforms alone were usually enough to cover most expenses on the shows. This meant that the production committee can't just listen to the Japanese fans. International reception to a series also became important. For example, Vinland Saga and Shield Hero are examples of shows that didn't do too well in Japan. However, their success in Western markets proved their profitability and led to more sequels. Before Demon Slayer, these changes were mild and didn't hugely impact the industry. However, with the success of Demon Slayer, companies have now officially set anime as the platform through which they will conduct globalization and growth for their business. Toho Animation is one example, as they heavily mentioned in the 2024 integrated report that overseas expansion was one of their key drivers of growth. They increased funding in their subsidiary, Toho International, and later officially turned it into Toho Global and split it from the other non-Japan subsidiaries to completely focus on Western markets. Furthermore, they also launched Aizo, an apparel store aimed at selling merchandise to Western fans. As the director of marketing in Toho International puts it, Aizo was created as a solution to use our position as Toho International to help fans access merchandise straight from Japan. On top of that, Toho is also rapidly investing in buying different media companies to further expand their control. In December 2023, they announced their intent to acquire a 25% stake in Fifth Season, an American multinational film and television production and distribution company. Later in December 2024, they also bought G-Kids, a film and television distributor most well known for the distribution of Hayao Miyazaki's newest film, The Boy and the Heron. Again, in 2024, they also made the stock investments in Igli Studio, an animation studio based in Thailand. Toho isn't the only company expanding to the West. Aniplex, a subsidiary of Sony, is also rapidly making investments. Way back in 2017, Sony bought Funimation. Then later in 2019, Sony consolidated its Australian and French anime divisions with Funimation to create a new Funimation-led joint venture called Funimation Global Group LLC. In 2020, Sony bought Crunchyroll for a hefty price of $1.1 billion and then moved Funimation's content over. On top of making movements in streaming, since they also owned multiple anime studios and could just control the entire anime production pipeline, it made much more sense to also look at non-Japanese areas for source materials to adapt. One example is of course Korean manhwa. Back in 2022, Aniplex announced the animation of Solo Leveling, a very popular webtoon. It later went on to become one of the most viewed titles on Crunchyroll. Furthermore, Aniplex had also announced the adaptation of popular webtoon Omniscient Reader at Anime Expo 2024. And these are just a couple of examples. Toei, Bandai Namco, and a bunch of other companies are also adapting to the market and taking large steps. But going through all of them would make this video way too long. I think what's in this video currently is already a lot of information. With all that in mind, you can now brag to your fellow anime buddies and pretend you know more because you watch this anime nerd talk for about 20 minutes about graphs and numbers on anime production. Nonetheless, I do hope that this video is informative and explains the changes within the anime industry over the past few years. I've said it many times, but it's honestly an understatement to say that the anime industry is booming more than ever. The numbers, I think, alone are enough proof of that. However, just like all things, there is always a catch. The increased markets means increased demands in animation studios, or more specifically, the animators. Although the industry is making tons of money, the majority of that never goes to the artists who create the animations. Even though the baseline compensation has definitely been improved as more animation studios are willing to increase the minimum wage, animators are still victims to tight schedules, and burnout is becoming more and more common. Furthermore, the new changes in industry also means that resources are largely going to skew towards safe IPs that already have popular source material. Original shows are almost non-existent at this point, especially if they're not previously affiliated with a game or a novel or something like that. That's why I was very excited for Cosmic Princess Kaguya's success. It showed that original titles still had a chance in this market. It's also interesting to think about how the future will look like once we run out of popular source materials to operate on. Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen have already ended, and their anime counterparts are eventually going to catch up. I'm not sure what it will look like when the anime finishes, but I do know that right now there isn't a large enough shonen anime to take that place. Of course, I don't know anything, and I'm not really an expert on this. Perhaps things will work out. After all, there's been plenty of times in the past where people have genuinely believed anime to be going downhill, but it's always recovered and come back again. I think for now, it's best to just sit back and enjoy the moment while you can.